everyone, and welcome to Under the Gun. I'm Jon Friedberg, and I have a really cool show today, which is going to focus on strategy. The very first part of the show, I'm going to have on my friend and poker mentor, cash game mentor, John Kim, who many of you know has already been on my show. He plays under the online name Nicolac and is a very successful cash game player. He and I are going to talk through my Under the Gun challenge and some cash game strategies more from an advanced standpoint. And then my panel today is going to be Eric Lynch and Nick Brancato. Eric, many of you know, is a longtime successful poker player. Nick Brancato is an instructor for the WPT boot camps, who I have also instructed along with at some of those events. So the first part of the show, we're going to talk more advanced strategy. And then in my panel with Eric and Nick, I'm going to talk to them more about entry-level strategy, and so it's going to be a really cool episode on strategy. I also want to announce that starting next week, because I've gotten so many requests on talking more strategy in this show, even though it's not really a strategy show, I do want to have start a new segment. I'm going to call it Am I an Idiot? And what I want you all to do is email me your questions, but what I would like to see are specific hands that you played, and I want all the details of your hands. I want the stakes, I want your stack size, I want your opponent's stack size, I want your cards, the suits, the flop, turn, river, everything. And what I'm going to do is go through the emails. I'm going to pick out one hand or more to discuss each show in this new segment called Am I an Idiot? And I'll tell you if yes, you are an idiot, or no, you're not, you played the hand right. And I think it'll be very educational. It'll be fun. And so email me your very complete and thorough scenarios to underthegun@cardplayer.com. All right, so with that said, I'm going to break into my Under the Gun challenge and bring on Mr. John Nicolac Kim. So, in my Under the Gun challenge, I am happy to say that after having a terrible start at the beginning of the series of the show, when I first started to play online cash games, I took a huge dip early on, and I am finally now in the black. I'm out of the red. I am profitable. Thanks to my friend and cash game coach, John Nicolac Kim, here sitting to my left, your right. I've made some huge improvements to my game. So real quickly, looking at my charts and where I'm at now. So this last week, I played in about 10,000 hands, and I won $1,900, which brings my total month of July to a $1,600 win. And overall, I've now played 56,000 hands of 1-2 no limit on UB, and I stand at plus $231. So I'm very happy with the progress. John has been helping me, like I said, with a lot of changes to my game, which we're going to talk about some. I've been getting a lot of requests for more strategy talk, so thought it would be great to have John on to discuss some of these things. Now, I would say there's like three key aspects of cash games that I personally have had the most, or had to make the most adjustments with. Okay, the first one is basically polarizing, which you talk a lot about in your segment on Poker Road. Which is basically raising your really good hands or your really bad hands, but not necessarily raising your average hands.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the purpose of that is to do a few things. Most of all, mislead your opponents that you're up against, so they never really know if you're really strong or really weak. Secondly, you only want to raise hands that if you get re-raised, you don't want to get shut off the hand. You don't want to like open up the action again. So in very strong spots you want to raise, very weak spots you want to raise, but if you're just kind of middle of the road, not necessarily to raise a hand that you could then open up the action and get re-raised off the hand, right? And you talk about that a lot in your last show on Poker Road. Secondly is the whole concept of non-showdown value winnings. So in other words, when you win certain hands and you get called at the end, that's a showdown winning. When you don't get called, that's non-showdown winning. So anytime you steal the blinds, or anytime you let's say you semi-bluff a flush draw and get a fold, those get logged as non-showdown winnings. And John and I have worked a lot on keeping my non-showdown winnings, which I will also show in a graph. Actually, we can put that graph on now. You can see this is my last week of playing, and the red line that you'll see hovers right around 0 is my non-showdown winnings line. So Jon, let's talk a little bit about the importance of the red line, as we call it, and why it's important to have your non-showdown winnings, right around break even or close to there.
Well, having it at least break even or close to there, it shows you don't have like big fundamental leaks. If your non-showdown is sloping down significantly, that probably means you're calling too much and folding later on in the hand, so you're pretty much losing money without having a chance to see what the other guy's hand is. Plus, by having it, hold steady, it shows that you're aggressive in spots, and it's intimidating to the other players. Having a higher non-showdown winning shows that you're aggressive, you're the aggressor usually, and that's one of the keys to success in poker.
Now, I have found that when I very first started with the software that I use, it shows my aggression level, which is basically some sort of calculation that, determines the percentage of times that I bet or raise as opposed to check or call.
Right.
Or fold. And my number was like ridiculously high.
Right.
And you had told me that with the software that we use that most pros are in like the 2.5 to 3.5 range.
Right.
And I was in like the 10 to 12 range, which
Right.
was through the roof. And my red line was also really good. My red line was like sloping up quite a bit because and now in hindsight, I see that I was basically continuation betting too much, which ultimately does lead to a lot of folds, but it's also a very spewy form of play. So I was putting in way too much money in hands where eventually I had to either was getting raised off of hands or check folded when I missed draws or whatever it was. What type of experience do you have on the tables playing against players, and what, I guess, strategy advice do you have to people about continuation betting and therefore,
Well, the main thing is when you continuation bet, you want to have a plan in the hand. You don't want to c-bet the flop or the turn with no plan later on in the streets. You have to think about what cards may come off, and you have to understand the range of hands your opponents may have and develop a plan going forward. If you c-bet without any thought in the hand, just because people are taught, I need to c-bet, I need to get my non-showdown up, without any thought, and then on the turn, a card comes off that you're not sure what to do. I mean, that's pretty bad, going forward. So you always want to have a plan before you c-bet. So that's the main consideration.
Right. Now, an example of that could be, let's say you raise with an ace-king and the flop comes 7, 8, 9,
Right.
which I've now learned that you don't have to c-bet as
Right.
often as I was initially c-betting, because a lot of the times you're just going to get raised and have to fold the hand, or you're going to get called and the turn's going to be a jack, and then you're just going to,
Right. The other thing is c-betting. You don't really have to c-bet now. You can take passive lines and try to induce bluffs later in the hand. Sometimes that's more profitable too. So, and in the state of today's game, there's a lot more aggression post-flop. So your opponents will make life tougher for you when they think your c-bet is pretty weak, and they'll raise bluff you sometimes without even a hand.
So what's an example of taking a more passive line and then bluffing on a later street?
I think when you were over at my place last night, I raised with 10-8 off. The flop came down king 10 6 with 2 diamonds, and I was in position. And my opponent checked, and I elected to check back the flop. It's pretty draw heavy. If I get check raised, I think I have to fold my weak middle pair there. Instead, I checked it back and turned with a brick. He bet. I called river with a brick. He bet. I called, and he showed a busted draw, right? So if I c-bet that flop, he check raised, I have to fold because I don't know if he's going to fire the turn and river, and I'm bloating the pot on the flop. So this way I took a more passive line and actually ended up inducing bets from him when he was on a draw.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's definitely a mistake that I was making a lot early on, was c-betting too much and barreling too much on hands, and having to fold in situations when if I could have just played more passively, right, I would have gotten to a showdown either for cheaper or maybe seen if I had improved or not, and not given my opponent a chance to raise me off the hand. The last key thing that I think I've really been having to work on is not having a fear of going broke in any given hand. Now, I played one particular hand absolutely horribly, where I had kings. We were both, myself and my opponent were very deep stacked. We were both sitting at around $600 in a 1-2 game, which is like 300 BBs deep. And I think I 3-bet pre-flop out of position with kings. He calls me, and then the flop comes like, 6, 7, 9 or something with 2 hearts, and I didn't have a heart. So I really just played my hand face up.
Right.
I think I 3-bet pre, he called. I bet the flop, and then he called. And then I just, actually he raised me on the flop. And I just called the raise, which almost turns my hand face up. And then the turn I check called. And then the river was another scare card, and I checked again like a total schoolgirl. And he overshoves the pot. He bet like 300 or something into a 200 something dollar pot. I forget what the numbers were, but basically the advice that you gave me was you can't play these hands with a fear of going broke.
Right.
And you shouldn't be getting involved in a hand in this particular spot without playing it more aggressively, because in today's games, the other players will definitely see that and capitalize on it.
Right. To be honest, I don't think your line was too bad, but I think you need to focus more on not the fact of going broke, the fear of going broke, but what you think the most plus EV line is, your decisions at hand in that particular moment. If you think calling the raise and then check calling down is the most plus EV, I think that's a fine line to take. But it depends on your opponents. Also, what I was gonna say, about your hand being face up. Yeah, that's definitely something I advocate. Is when you play your hands, especially when you're the aggressor, you want to take a line where your hand is not face up to your opponents. And most opponents today are pretty good and can hand read pretty well. And it's very advantageous to take a line with your particular hand where your range of hands could be a wide range to your opponent. So this way they're more confused and they might make mistakes against you. Like I think when you sweated me, most of the hands I played, I took, I don't want to say conventional lines, but there was the possibility that I could have bluffs in my range as well as value hands. So when you take a line with a particular hand, you want to make sure that, your opponents know that you have a wide range of hands in that particular instance.
Right. So I guess I can tell the world, I'm cautious, in a weird way, not to give too much information, because I'm sure that many of the people that I play against are watching this show right now. So I don't want to give, too many details. But I did promise to offer some strategy and tips to everybody and, share my experiences that I've been learning. So from observing me, you were over at my house the other night watching me play. What thing or things have you noticed about my game that maybe I'm doing too much or not doing enough of that other people also are probably, would take it as advice to them as well?
Well, I mean, first of all, I have to commend you on showing a profit. In today's games, it's not easy to come out playing initially and start winning right away. So everyone's pretty solid nowadays. Second thing regarding your game, I mean, there's a few things. As for any beginner, it's going to be a while before you get the hang of it. The games are tough nowadays, like I mentioned. But I think you can, start opening up a little more, maybe play more hands in position. I felt like you folded some hands in the last 2 positions where I thought you can play profitably. So that's one of the big things I noticed. As for other stuff, post-flop play, I think reading hands, you're getting pretty good at that. But there's a fine line between value betting and bluffing. And I think bluffing takes a little more skill, just because some people are afraid of firing that big bluff. And I'm not saying you don't do it, but I think, that's one of the areas where you can work on is, knowing that you can rep a credible hand and fire that big barrel and get them to fold. And even if they do end up calling you, it's not a bad thing, because now they know that you're capable of doing that, and, they might be a little more intimidated against you in future hands. So it's always good to show a bluff once in a while, too.
Okay, good advice for myself and others, I'm sure. So JK, Jon, thank you so much for coming on. One thing that I would also like to do with you maybe in a couple more weeks from now is bring out some specific hands where I can ask you, and we can, of course, show the viewers these hands, and We can talk about my decisions and whether they were right or wrong, and you can critique the hands. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Sure.
Awesome.
Be happy.
And tell everybody what your new gig is real quick.
Oh, I'm the new co-host on the podcast Cash Plays on PokerWorld.com with Jeremiah Smith.
Awesome. Congratulations
Thanks.
on that. Cool. Well, JK, thanks again for coming on. And with that, let me break into my interview with, or my panel discussion on less advanced strategy, more so newcomers to the game. I have Eric Lynch on today and Nick Brancato, both of whom are longtime poker instructors. They don't really teach advanced players as much as they teach more sort of amateurs or people that are new to the game, so they're going to have a different perspective. So in keeping today's strategy theme in line, let's bring on Mr. Eric Lynch and Nick Brancato. Eric, Nick, thanks for coming on the show. Glad to have you guys here.
Thank you for having us.
So you two, like I said in my intro, are what I consider to be in like the top tier of poker instructors, especially in like the live poker training, seminars or whatever you call them. What type of mistakes do you commonly see in people that are learning the game? Either their perception of the game or just common errors that or strategies that people have trouble grasping when they're first learning how to play.
One of the biggest problems I see is people just generally call too much. They want to play too many hands. They get bored. They overvalue a lot of hands, particularly in relation to position. They'll want to play like a king nine under the gun and things like that. They just don't really understand how position changes the game and how some hands look a little better than they actually play. There's a lot of other things. But.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that No Limit Hold'em seems so simple because the rules are easy and you watch it on TV and you kind of understand what the players on TV are doing. So it seems like you have a better understanding of the game than you actually do. So a big pitfall is just people not thinking they have anything to learn about the game. And then oftentimes when they come to a WPT boot camp, they leave saying, wow, I didn't realize how bad I was. And now they're on the road toward learning. It's kind of important to know what you don't know so that you can see what areas you need to improve in. And like Eric said, position and playing too many hands and calling too often are probably the two biggest mistakes people make.
Yeah, and I mean, even sometimes like in my private instruction and stuff, one of the things I see, and Nick does a really good job of explaining this, but I'll try and do it justice. People think of poker as like this hierarchy of choices where like, okay, if I have a really good hand, I'll raise, but if I have an okay hand, I'll call, and if I have a bad hand, I'll fold. But really, like, people just end up getting a lot of marginal situations where they're calling in because they don't really want to know what to do. They're making some sort of compromise. They're like, well, my hand's not strong enough to raise, but I really don't want to fold, so I'm going to go ahead and call. And poker doesn't really work that way. I mean, most of the times if you call because you don't know what to do, you'd be better off just folding. And I see that leak all the time, both at the WPT boot camps and in some private instruction. So
now, a lot of people think that they can just pay the money and enter one of these seminars, which really aren't cheap if you think about it. But at the same time, I think there's definitely it's a good investment if you can improve your game to the point where you can do well and win that money back, the first day after you leave the seminar. But can anybody become a profitable poker player? I mean, does every human being on this planet, without any type of deficiencies, obviously, does everybody have what it takes to be a profitable poker player?
I think that poker is a pure skill, and so that anybody with average intelligence or better can learn to become a profitable player. Can they learn in a week? Probably not. Can they eventually learn if they're willing to put in the time and practice, and they have someone guiding them, either through live instruction or online instruction or private coaching? I think that anybody can eventually learn to be a profitable poker player, but most players aren't willing to put in the amount of work and practice that it actually takes to do so. But if you're playing poker, most people, they play for the rest of their lives. They don't start playing No Limit Hold'em hardcore and then just quit. So even if they can't become a profitable poker player, maybe they can break even or lose less sooner so that their hobby doesn't at least cost them a lot of money.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that, it kind of depends on how you define profitable player. I mean, I really do think anyone can beat a lot of the lower stakes games if they're willing to put in the time and develop the skills necessary. If somebody can be able to hop into like a 2-4 game online or even like a 5-10 live game and be able to beat it, I mean, I don't know that anyone, there are certain people I think probably couldn't ever beat those games. But generally, if you have some basic math skills, like Nick said, average intelligence, and you're willing to put in the time, I think anyone can be profitable. Are you going to make a living off of it? maybe not, but you can certainly turn a profit, at least not lose money.
Yeah, I guess it depends, like what, maybe I should have been more specific. I agree with you that the online cash games are very difficult, especially compared to like the low stakes live games.
Yeah.
And when you're, let's say you go and you hop into a 1-2 game at a local casino here in Las Vegas, for the most part, you're going to be in the game with like 8 other people that are recreational, drinking, they may as well be playing craps because it's the same thing to them, really.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when people are playing live, low stakes, a lot of people are playing 1-2 no limit live because they lose money at it slower than they lose playing craps, and they do it as another form of gambling. They're not thinking of it as a pure skill and trying to make correct decisions. So I think that those games are very beatable. Even with just a 2-day seminar, most people could come out learning how to beat those lower stakes live games. Beating medium stakes or high stakes online is much more difficult, than it would be live. But I think that anybody can eventually learn to beat the game if they're willing to put in the time and practice. There's a lot of myths around poker, like, you have to have this special talent. You have to be able to read into your opponent's soul and, see what they don't want you to see. But I mean, I feel like all those things are really overrated. You see people come from out of nowhere and then do really well live, and people tend to attribute that to some kind of special talent. But really, those people who usually come out of nowhere have put in like hundreds of thousands or millions of hands online, especially like the Net 15 types and the DURs. They've put in the time, they've played for years online, and now they come and they do really well live. They don't just have some kind of special talent.
Well, that also can go to show you that the live components of reading people, like their physical presence, might not be as important as some people think it is. Now, it's obviously very important. I think for whatever, poker skills you lack, you can sometimes overcompensate with that by having, body understanding physical tells and whatnot. But ultimately, I think the game itself is much more important than being able to read people, unless, of course, you have like a real nervous, obvious
yeah,
twitch.
I mean, like the physical tells thing, I really think that it's overrated by a lot. The big thing it helps with is like close decisions. I mean, I did have like a hand in the World Series so far where I was thinking of folding a hand, and I was stacking up my chips, and I like moved them onto my card, like kind of like I was gonna move them forward, but put it on my card instead. And I could just tell the guy really didn't want me to stick my chips in there, so it made a decision where I was thinking about folding, but it was kind of close, into one where I called, and I ended up having the best hand. But in general, I mean, nobody who has no skill at the game or is a very poor player, but has some sort of like almost supernatural reading abilities is going to be able to overcome the fact that they don't play poker very well and be able to be a winning player. It's
Right.
just, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, like I think Joe Navarro's a good example. He's great with tells, obviously. He was an FBI profiler, and I think his book is excellent. But he actually doesn't play poker. That's because he's never really studied the game or practiced the game. I don't think he could just enter World Series events and dominate just because of his ability to physically read people, Reading people is important and tells are important, but they're often secondary, factors when making a decision in a hand, like Eric said. They help with marginal choices, but if you're doing all the fundamentals wrong, they're not going to save you.
Yeah, to me, it's a lot like people that play online and then like try and use Poker Tracker or Hold'em Manager to make their decisions for them. Like, you're never going to be a winning poker player if you're like, oh, well, this says this guy does this many times, so this is what I need to do. But when you have a close decision, you can look and say, hey, this guy's a really aggressive player, so it's possible he's bluffing with a higher frequency here than most other players would be. So I can go ahead and make a marginal call that I might not otherwise make, but is a otherwise pretty close decision.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Eric. You've done a lot of online poker instruction where you basically, record yourself playing, and the people watching your videos can see your whole cards, and you talk through your decisions. I talk a lot about that on this show, about people that are willing to be trainers for, or instructors, I should say, for not a tremendous amount of compensation. Have you found that in doing these videos, it's tougher to play because people watch your videos and they understand kind of what your thought process is?
I don't really think so. Like, for every time I've had somebody make a play against me and be like, that I wouldn't have gotten them to make before and have it be a good play, I've had another guy be like, well, I saw you do that with 3-4 suited, so they raised me with like 7-8 and I have aces and I get a bunch of action. So I really think that, people react to me differently than they used to, and I've had to adjust to that. But I don't really think it's like cost me anything at the table. It does make things a little more difficult because I figure out who might have seen my videos and who might not have, or who knows how I play and who doesn't. But so much of my game is about adjusting to the table that I really don't feel like it's costed me anything.
Do you ever have a moment where you just get completely outplayed? Not in one particular...
No, that never happens.
Or never. Well,
never get outplayed.
Let's say you're in a tournament, and let's say you're getting deep in a tournament, and everyone's like raising and 3-betting in position, and you're just getting owned, right? And you think to yourself, wow, and you know, when I was playing on Party Poker back in 2003 and 2004, this never happened. Maybe I shouldn't have made all those videos. Do you ever think back and think, wow, I wish I hadn't done these videos. It wasn't worth it because now the poker, you know, all the online games are so much tougher than they used to be. Do you ever blame yourself for that?
I don't blame myself for that. If I hadn't done it, somebody else would. And like, I really can't take that much credit for being responsible for that. It's not like my videos are so tremendously awesome that everyone became a better player just because of them. And people would have watched the other video sites, they would become better. The game always gets more aggressive. Like, maybe, you know, online training in general has made the game evolve a lot faster, and as well as live training. But I don't regret making the videos myself. I mean, why don't I get paid a little bit while people get better? I mean, you know, if I hadn't done it, then somebody else would have done it. They would have gotten compensated for it, and you know, the games would still be tougher. I don't really regret it. I regret not playing a whole lot more back in 2003 and 2004, or I regret not having a time machine so I could go back and play in those games again. But I don't regret making the videos.
I fantasize about that daily. If I could just go back like 4 years and just be a cash game specialist, I'd have all the money in my pocket.
Yeah, just take all the knowledge you have now back like 3 or 4 years.
I mean, everybody used to just limp, and then you could raise and, you know, pick up all the money. It was amazing how transparent people played back in the day.
Yeah, it's incredible how tight, especially the online games have become. Like, there was a time, I play 8 tables online, usually of cash, and there was a time when, on Party Poker, I would play 8 games, but I would never sit at a table if the players per flop was less than 30%. And now most of the games I play, and the players per flop is like 15% or 16%, and I get all excited when it's 20%. They're just so much tighter, and it's hard to be tight players who don't make a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of people who just play like pairs, ace king and ace queen, and then they loosen up a little from the button and the cutoff. It's hard to beat players that just play tight, solid poker. I mean, they don't win a lot either, but it's like trying to squeeze water from a rock. You know, you're not going to crush them. You're just going to have to take advantage of lots of small edges to beat the games now.
Right. Well, luckily, and despite the fact that the U.S. poker economy is allegedly down quite a bit, the influx of, you know, all these other countries, Russia, the South America region, Asia, is, as you can, you know, as we saw in the World Series this year, there are, you know, so many more people playing events, which is great. So I think, you know, that will hopefully bring a lot more dead money into the games again, now that all this popularity has spread to all these other regions, and therefore continue the longevity of our careers as professional poker players and instructors, right?
Absolutely. And I think the games are definitely loosen up when new players come into play. You know, one of the things that keeps the online games tough is that it's hard to deposit money. You know, it's not that you can't do it, but you can't do it easily. You know, before there used to be guys that play 5-10 online and drop a few grand every weekend because it's so easy to deposit. Now a lot of those players have, you know, a $600 cap if they can even get the money in easily. You know, you can't use a credit card anymore. It's not always easy to just use an e-check. You know, there's a lot of barriers to entry now to play online. And so a lot of the worst players aren't playing as regularly as they were 5 years ago.
Are those barriers only in the U.S., or do those also apply to other areas? Like, if you're a Russian citizen living in Russia, is it easier to put on money in Russia? Do either of you know?
Yeah, I mean, in the experiences I've had with Luck Poker, yeah, they have a lot easier time, like with our European and foreign customers. Like, they can use e-wallets that we don't have access to, and it's just super easy for them to get money online. In fact, a lot of the money that I make playing on there I get from Russian sports bettors, or at least according to their location.
Yeah, I'd be careful saying that on camera. I see all these Russian. I'm just kidding.
I mean, after NetTeller pulled out of the U.S., you know, it really slowed down the number of bad players in the games because it was just so easy to deposit thousands of dollars before. Now it's just much more difficult. In fact, many online sites lower your deposit limits if you don't play with a high enough frequency. Like, high volume players can deposit more than low volume players, and they lower your ability to deposit if you're inactive. And a lot of recreational players might go through spurts where they play a ton for a week and they don't play for a couple weeks. and they go back online and find their deposit limits have been lowered because of their inactivity.
Well, we should fix that, sites, okay? Let's get that taken care of. All right, well, thank you guys for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank
Been
you.
a pleasure having
Thank
you. Best of luck for the rest of the year, and I look forward to maybe doing some more boot camps with you guys.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
great.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Under the Gun. Lots of strategy. I'm learning a lot in poker, and wow, this game is so fascinating. So many levels of depth in terms of the thinking. It's really cool. And whether you're a new player that's just learning about poker, just coming into the game, or already a winning player but looking to improve your game, there's really just an endless amount of information out there. And hopefully this show now adds to that stack of resources for you. So remember, email me your hand scenarios, very complete with all the information, or else I can't really make a judgment call on it or discuss it with you. underthegun@cardplayer.com. And of course, follow me on Twitter for your chance to win a free poker lesson. I'm at Jon Friedberg. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next week.